You're watching Cheat Sheet Tales, where true stories of love, lies, and betrayal come to life. If you're enjoying these videos, don't just watch, hit that like button. It helps more than you know. Now, let's get into today's story. I don't know if I'm telling this story for sympathy, forgiveness, or maybe just to let it out of my system. Whatever the reason, I'm not proud of what I did, and I don't expect anyone to understand, but I need to say it. Even if just once. My name is Mela. I was 34 when it happened. I had been married to Adrian for 9 years. We lived in a small town where everyone knew everyone else, and rumors traveled faster than the wind from the outside. My life probably looked stable, comfortable, home, decent income, a husband who never missed dinner. But from the inside, things were different. And it took me a long time to admit that Kalebny wasn't a bad man. He never raised his voice or his hand. He was steady, reliable. But that was all it was like living with a co-worker, a roommate. We had the same conversations every day. How was work? What's for dinner? Did you take the trash out? There were no surprises, no curiosity. And slowly I became invisible in my own marriage. I had started working part-time at a local bookstore. It wasn't about them, Unny. I just needed something to fill my days. That's where I first started seeing Julian regularly. He was Kalebny's childhood friend. They had known each other since school, and still saw each other now. And then Julian was nothing like Caleb. He was spontaneous, funny in a quiet way, and he noticed things like when I changed my hair or when I seemed tired the first time Julian came into the shop. It wasn't unusual. He came in looking for a book about vintage motorcycles. We talked for a few minutes, mostly about the book, but what I remember most is that he asked me how I was not the way people ask out of politeness. But he actually wanted to know that question. Asked sincerely, stayed with me all day over the next few weeks. He stopped by more often, always, with a new excuse. A book. He wanted a gift. He needed to buy sometimes just a coffee from the cafe next door. And slowly we talked more. Nothing dramatic, just small moments. But those moments were what I'd been missing. I began to feel seen again, and I didn't realize how much I had needed that. I didn't tell Caleb that Julian was coming by so often. Not because I was hiding anything. At least, not yet. But because I knew he wouldn't understand. He would think it was strange or inappropriate. Maybe it was, but to me it felt like breathing. Again, after holding my breath for years. One Thursday afternoon, it was raining, hard, the kind of rain that soaks you through no matter what you're wearing. Email came in dripping wet, holding a bag with a plastic-wrapped novel inside. I laughed and told him he looked like a drowned cat. He smiled and said, "I came for the book, but also the company." That was the first time I felt it, a pull I didn't want to name, and I knew I had to be careful. I told myself it was harmless. I was just lonely. I hadn't crossed any lines. I wasn't doing anything wrong, but of course I was. Maybe not in action yet, but in heart things. The home got colder. Caleb was more distracted than usual. He spent his evenings watching television, scrolling through his phone, answering work emails, even when he didn't have to. I tried starting conversations. I even asked if we could take a weekend trip somewhere, just the two of us. He nodded vaguely and said we'd plan something soon, but we never did. I started writing in a notebook things I wanted to say, but couldn't. I wrote about my loneliness, my guilt, my confusion. And slowly I found Julian's name showing up in those pages more often than I cared to admit. One evening after a particularly long day, I came home to find Julian's voice in my head. Again, he had said something earlier at the store that I couldn't forget. I'd mentioned I used to paint before I got married, and he asked why I stopped. I had no good answer. I didn't even know. That question haunted me all day that night, after Kalebny had gone to sleep. I opened the hallway closet and pulled out a dusty box of old art supplies, I sat at the kitchen table and started to draw. Again, my hands were clumsy, but it felt like meeting a part of myself I had forgotten existed. I wanted to tell someone, and I didn't want it to be Caleb. The next time I saw Julian, I told him I started drawing again. He looked genuinely happy. That's great. He said, "You should never stop doing the things that make you feel alive." That word alive made something twist inside me, and I realized just how long I had been numb. I began to feel like I was living two lives, one with Caleb, predictable quiet, a house filled with polite silence, and another in brief moments with Julian, passing glances, short conversations, memories of laughter that stayed with me longer than they should have. One Friday afternoon, Julian waited until no one else was in the shop. He handed me a wrapped notebook. "This is for your sketches," he said. "Thought you deserved a clean start." It was a beautiful leather journal, untouched. I should have refused it, but I didn't. I thanked him, and for a moment our hands touched, just briefly, but enough to make my heart thump, like I'd run a marathon that weekend. Caleb and I barely spoke. I watched him fall asleep on the couch, remote in hand, while I sat beside him sketching in the notebook. Julian had given me every page I filled, felt like a secret, and every secret, madame, feel more distant from my husband. One morning I found a meal waiting outside the shop before I opened. He had coffee in his hands and a nervous look on his face. "Can we talk?" he asked. I hesitated. Everything in me told me not to go down this road, but I nodded. We sat in the back room, just two chairs and a small table between us. He looked at me for a long time before speaking. "I think about you more than I should," he said quietly. "And I know it's wrong. Caleb's my friend. You're married, but I can't pretend I don't care about you." My heart was racing. I didn't know what to say. A part of me wanted to tell him to stop, to never say those words again. But the other part, the lonely, neglected part, wanted to hear it all. I didn't speak, just looked at him, and in that silence, so much passed between us. That was the moment the line blurred. We didn't touch, we didn't kiss, but something shifted, and from that day on, I knew things could never go back to the way they were after. That day in the back room, I couldn't look at Julian the same way again. And worse, I couldn't look at myself the same way either. Every interaction with him started to carry weight. Even a simple hello felt loaded. I found myself looking forward to his visits more than I should have. And when he didn't come for a few days, I felt restless, like something important was missing. I told myself I was just being dramatic, that it was just a harmless crush. But deep down, I knew it was something more dangerous at home. Caleb didn't notice the change in me. Or if he did, he didn't say anything. I had always been the one to fill the silence, to keep things moving, but now I didn't try as hard. I cooked dinner, asked him about work, nodded through his short answers, then escaped to my notebook as soon as I could. I started drawing M's face without even realizing it. I sketched his eyes, his smile, the way his hair fell across his forehead. Then I'd drip the page out and throw it away, ashamed of myself. But the next night I'd do it again. One afternoon we closed the store early for maintenance work. Julian offered to help move a few boxes. It was just the two of us in the back. The sound of rain against the windows and the smell of dust and old paper in the air. I was lifting a heavy stack when he stepped in to take it from me, and our hands touched. Again, this time neither of us pulled. I don't know how long we stood there, just staring at each other. I remember feeling everything and nothing at once: fear, guilt, longing, then a step back. "This is wrong," I said, softly. "I know," he replied. We didn't say anything else. He helped me finish moving the boxes, and then he left, without another word. But something had shifted again, and this time I wasn't sure we could undo it that night. I sat on the couch while Caleb watched a crime show. He didn't ask how my day was. He didn't notice how quiet I was. I looked at him, really looked, and felt a strange sadness. Not anger, not hate, just sadness. I remembered the man I had married, the one who used to bring me flowers just because, who once drove 6 hours in the rain, just to see me for one night when we were dating. And I wondered where that man had gone the next day. Julian didn't come by, or the next. I felt his absence like a cold draft in the room. I tried to distract myself. I rearranged shelves, cleaned the entire back office, even offered to cover coworkers' weekend shift, but nothing helped. And then late one Sunday evening, I got a message, just one sentence. "Are you okay?" It was from Julian. I stared at it for a long time. I could have ignored it. I should have, but I replied, "I don't know." He didn't respond immediately. I sat there, my phone in my hand, wondering what I was doing. Then the screen lit up again. "Do you want to talk?" I said, "Yes." We met in the parking lot behind the bookstore. It was nearly 9 p.m., and the street was empty. We sat in his car windows, slightly cracked, the radio playing low. Neither of us knew how to start. "I've been trying to stay away," he said finally, "but I keep thinking about you." "I think about you too," I whispered. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't dramatic. It was just two people sitting in a car, scared of their own feelings. We talked for a long time about life, about love, about feelings. Julian said he'd always thought I was different. Even back when I first married Caleb, he said he didn't want to be the reason for something falling apart. And I said I didn't want to be someone who hurt others. But we had already crossed an invisible line, we knew it. And yet neither of us could walk away. After that night we started meeting, more often never at home, never anywhere, public, always quiet, always careful. We told ourselves we were just talking, just trying to understand things, but feelings don't come with labels or warnings, they just grow. I found myself laughing again, thinking again, feeling again. Julian challenged me, made me think differently, reminded me of who I used to be, and slowly the guilt I carried started to dull, replaced by something I didn't expect: hope. But hope is dangerous when it's built on secrets. One evening, Caleb surprised me. He brought home flowers, white lilies. My favorite. I hadn't mentioned them in years. I thought we could go out this weekend, he said. Just the two of us. Maybe that lake you liked. I didn't know what to say. I stared at the flowers like they were something foreign. I miss you, Melahay added, quietly. It was the first time he'd said anything like that in a long time, and it broke something in me. I spent that night pacing the hallway, unsure of what to do. I had built this secret part of my life without ever thinking what would happen if the truth collided with it. I never planned to hurt anyone. I never thought it would go this far. The next day, I told Julian we needed to stop that. Caleb and waist trying that maybe things could change. Julian nodded, but his eyes were heavy. Understand, he said, but be honest with yourself. Don't stay just because it's easier than leaving. I didn't respond. Just walked away for a few days. I smiled more at home. I told Adriana about my day. We watched a movie together, even went for a walk around the neighborhood like we used to. But the distance between us wasn't just emotional, it had become part of the foundation. And every time I looked at him, I felt like a stranger in my own life. One night, I found the notebook Julian had given me. I hadn't touched it in weeks. Opened it to the first blank page and began to write. Not sketches this time, but words, my thoughts, my feelings. Everything I had held in. I wrote 4 hours, and when I finished, I realized I had written something like a confession, not just to Julian or Caleb, but to myself. I didn't know what the next step was. I didn't know if I would stay or leave if Caleb knew, and I could rebuild, or if the damage had already gone too deep. But I knew I couldn't keep pretending anymore. The truth was coming. Whether I liked it or not, a few days after I poured my truth into that notebook, sat at the kitchen table with Caleb and placed it in front of him. He looked at it like it was a gift he hadn't expected, or maybe a letter from someone he no longer knew. I need you to read this, I said, quietly. Not now, but soon. It's everything. I haven't. Said he didn't ask questions, he didn't get angry. He just nodded and took it. I went for a walk. While he read it, my hands were cold, even in my jacket pockets. And I kept replaying every word I had written. I had talked about the emptiness, the distance, between us, and yes, I wrote about Julian, not in detail. Not to hurt him, but enough for him. To understand how far things had gone, and how lost I had felt. When I returned home, Caleb was still at the table, the notebook was closed, and he sat with his head in his hands. I wish you had told me sooner, he said, his voice raw. I didn't know how he nodded. Slowly I've been gone too. Haven't I not physically, but in every other way. I sat across from him. Yes, but I let it happen. I stopped trying. I stopped hoping. There was a long silence between us, not bitter. Just honest, I can't pretend this didn't happen, he finally said. But I don't want to lose you. Tears filled my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Then we need to build from nothing. Not the past, just the truth. The next few weeks were the most difficult and most honest of our lives. Caleb didn't ask me to erase a meal from my memory. He didn't shame me or raise his voice. He just asked. Questions, hard ones, painful ones. And he answered all of them with the same honesty I had avoided for so long. I told Julian we couldn't talk anymore. Not because I didn't care, but because if I was going to fight for my marriage, I had to give it everything. He understood. He didn't beg or plead. He just said, "You deserve peace, Mela. I hope you find it." I cried after that call, not because I regretted anything, but because I knew it was goodbye. He had entered my life like a spark, and while that light had warmed me, when I felt cold, it wasn't mine to keep Calebni, and I started therapy together for the eye. First time we sat in a room where someone helped us say what we'd buried for years. We learned things about each other that we should have learned a decade ago. I realized how often I had silenced my own needs just to keep peace. He realized how often he'd retreated, assuming silence was the same as stability. It wasn't easy. We had nights where we slept apart, arguments that left us emotionally drained. But we also had breakthroughs. We rediscovered little joys, laughing over coffee, cooking together, sitting on the porch without filling the silence, and slowly something real began to grow between us again. I don't believe in fairy tales anymore. Life doesn't work that way, but I believe in second chances earned, not given. Believe in choosing someone every day, not just on the day you say your vows. I believe love doesn't always look the way you expect. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's messy. And sometimes it asks you to face your worst moments to find your best ones. One evening, Caleb and I sat on the couch after dinner. The sun had just set and the sky outside. Our window was a soft blend of gold and blue. He reached for my hand. "Do you ever think about him?" he asked gently. I didn't lie sometimes. He nodded. "Do you still love him?" I paused. I think I loved who I was when I was with him. But it wasn't meant to last. We have a lifetime of history. We just forgot how to live in it. He didn't let go of my hand. I'm glad you told me, even if it broke something, because now we know what we're building. I smiled. Not a wide dramatics smile, just a real one. The kind that comes after a long storm now. Months later, I still carry everything that happened with me. Not as a shameful secret, but as a reminder of what can happen when we stop speaking, stop seeing each other, stop being honest. Julian was never a villain, and I wasn't just a woman who strayed. We were two people trying to feel something real. But history didn't end with betrayal. It didn't end with broken glass or slammed doors. It ended with truth, and from that truth, a new beginning. I wake up each morning next to Caleb, not out of obligation, but out of choice. We still have hard days. We still stumble, but now we talk. We look each other in the eye. We listen, and I've learned that sometimes the strongest love isn't the one that never falters, but the one that survives after it does. That's my story. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it changed everything.